Hey everybody, it's Debbie Meighan, and I'm here doing my dinner with Debbie. I normally do this on Facebook Live, but for some reason I'm having some technical difficulties, so I decided to jump over here on Instagram and do live on Instagram. So tonight, this is like a very much anticipated recipe. I am making the mushroom pot pie, and when this video gets downloaded, I will have in the comments all the ingredients and the recipe on how to make the mushroom pot pie. So it's actually, this is something that would be a great recipe to make on the weekend when you have a little bit of extra time. I will tell you it is definitely worth the effort, but there are a few steps to it and there's a lot of ingredients. So I'm just going to get right to it. The first thing that I got were dried porcini mushrooms. You can see this is the package that they came in. I boiled some water and I poured the water over the porcinis and I'm letting them sit so that they can get soft. So we're going to go ahead and let these sit for a little bit. I have a large 12-inch skillet. This is a kind of skillet that can go into the oven because this is going to be kind of a one-pot meal in that we're going to take this, we're going to start it on the cooktop and then put it in the oven. So I have a bowl here for, you'll see, our steps. So while the porcinis are getting reconstituted, I'm going to tell you about the mushrooms that we're using. We are using oyster mushrooms, and I'm also using some shiitake mushrooms that are sliced, and I have some cremini mushrooms which I've destemmed and quartered. Whoops, lost one. And if you didn't know it, fun fact, cremini mushrooms are actually baby bellas. So if you're in the store and you see and you have a recipe that calls for cremini mushrooms, you're really looking for baby bellas, and that's usually what you find at the store. So I just poured about 2 tablespoons of olive oil into my pan that is heating on medium-high heat. And I'm going to start by taking these oyster mushrooms, which are kind of like, they come together in like a clump, like a big clump like this. So what we're going to do is pull them apart, and after the oil gets hot, we'll put them on and salt and pepper them. But I am just like basically pulling them apart like little, almost like little flower petals. I'm just pulling them apart so that we're not doing a big clump. And basically what we're going to be doing is sauteing all of these mushrooms separately so that they have a nice good color and their flavor and really comes out. And as you can see, I'm just pulling these apart with my hands. I did wash my hands. I'm just pulling something out of the oven. So that I have room in the oven when we need it. So we have our oil heating in our 12-inch skillet, and what I'm going to do is take these oyster mushrooms and I'm going to spread them around the pan. This is 1 4-ounce container. The recipe, you'll see when you get the recipe, you'll see that it is going to call for a ½ pound of oyster mushrooms or shiitake mushrooms. Well, I decided to use both, so I'm doing ½ pound of each. And basically what I'm doing is doing them half at a time. Now that I've got them in the pan, I'm going to do a little salt. Here's my little salt box. Love my salt box. And a little pepper. And we're going to let these sit. I'm going to stir them just a little bit to get the salt and pepper mixed in. But then I'm going to let them sit and brown. So we're going to sit and let these brown for about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to stir them up and get them on the other side. So I use this time to prep any other ingredients. But I actually did a lot of prepping before I came on because I knew there were just so many steps. So we've got, once we have the mushrooms going, oh, don't want to forget, what are we drinking tonight? This is a great dish for, this is a Pinot Noir. So this is what I'm going to be drinking tonight, along with our mushrooms. Let me see. It smells great. Yeah, it's nice. Let me say a little bit about this Pinot. This is a Bel Pente from, where was this from? I don't have my glasses on, so it's hard for me to read. Gosh, it's from, why am I having a hard time reading this? Yamil Carlton AVA. But, and see, the label is absolutely beautiful. It's a watercolor. Oh, it's Oregon. So this is an Oregon Pinot Noir. No wonder it tastes so good. All right, so these mushrooms are ready for stirring. You can see that they're starting to get some color on them, which is what I want to see. And you can see I have not loaded up this pan with a lot of oysters, because if you, not oysters, oyster mushrooms, because if I put in too many, they would be crowded and then they would steam and not brown. And I really want to get that caramelization on them so that they get brown and really bring out that really yummy flavor. So these are looking pretty good. So I'm going to move on to the shiitake mushrooms, which, if you've been watching me do my cooking shows, I kind of had a hiatus from the cooking shows for a little while because it's kind of like a thing I did during the pandemic, and then I kind of got away from it. But then people started asking me about them, so I decided to give it a whirl and see if you'd do it again. So I'm getting ready to put my next batch in, so I'm going to throw a little bit more olive oil in. And these are my shiitake mushrooms. I bought these already sliced. You can see, makes it so much easier. I'm just going to dump those in. Give them a little bit of a stir so that they aren't clumped together. And then again, I'm going to hit them with the salt and the pepper. And I've noticed that with the shiitake mushrooms, they tend to soak up the oil really quickly, and they will stick to the pan if you don't watch them. So make sure you have enough oil in that pan, and it is okay to put more oil in there if it starts to look a little dry. It's olive oil, it's good for you. All right, so I'm going to let that sit for a little bit. Yeah, while I was getting ready for this, so I got this recipe from the New York Times Cooking. That is a subscription service that I do pay for. It's only like $5 a month to get just the New York Times Cooking, because, you know, I could care less about the rest of the paper. Well, maybe the real estate section I would like, but you know, but I'm mostly interested in their recipes. So this was a recipe I got from there. I'll be sharing it on my Instagram, and I've started a little playlist on YouTube for these videos as well. So you'll find it in the captions for all of the places where I post it. Normally, as you know, I am on Facebook Live, but for some reason Facebook wasn't liking me doing a live video. I don't know what the problem was, so I just decided to not do it. So I'm over here on Instagram instead. But These mushrooms, because they're kind of smaller, a little bit more delicate, they brown up pretty quickly. So you'll find that even though we're doing these in batches, they'll go through pretty quickly. So one thing I like about this recipe is that you do, since you have the pan that is oven proof, you put it together in this pan, you make this beautiful sauce that's really creamy and yummy, and then we put a crust over it. I did deviate from the recipe a little bit, and you'll notice that if you watch the whole video and then see, you know, what the recipe is, how it came out. But the original recipe calls for puff pastry to go on top, and I tried it that way the first time, and I didn't really care for it. So I'm trying. I just got a refrigerated pie crust to put on top, and we'll see how we like that. So let me give you a little look-see here. You see how nice and brown those got? And they smell really good too. They smell really good. So these look like they're good. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in the same bowl where I have the oyster mushrooms. And I am using a spoon that has, you know, like a straining spoon. So that, you know, I'm not like dumping a ton of oil into the mushrooms. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit more oil, do a little swirl around the pan, and here I have a half a pound of cremini mushrooms. I have destemmed these and I quartered them. If they were larger mushrooms, I cut them into maybe 6 pieces instead of 4. And if they were little baby ones, I maybe just cut them in half. So I'm going to give these a little stir here to get them coated in the olive oil. And I'm also going to hit them with, guess what? With salt and pepper. Now I just take tiny pinches of salt. If you're sensitive to salt, I would say don't put as much. We're somewhat sensitive to salt in this house. I'm not, but my significant other is. So I try to minimize the salt. There. So one of the interesting things I found out about mushrooms is that, you know, I find these mushrooms, you might have a hard time to find oyster mushrooms in some grocery stores. I got these at Wegmans, so that might be something, you know, maybe it'll be a little bit easier to find shiitake mushrooms. And in that case, use all shiitake mushrooms. Use a whole half pound of shiitake instead of half and half like I did. Or use, you know, a half a pound of oyster mushrooms. The little white button mushrooms that you find at the store that we use it a lot in cooking. And then you find like the big portobello mushrooms, which are big, and a lot of times people are, you know, actually even like grilling them like hamburgers. This is getting a little dry, so I'm going to throw a little oil in here. And then there's these, you know, what they call like baby bellas at the store. They're all the same mushroom, believe it or not. I thought they were 3 different varieties, but they're not. They're just, you know, the white mushrooms are kind of the same mushroom, but they've been cultivated to be white, and they're the youngest version of the mushroom. When, if you were to find a white, you know, the same variety of mushroom in the wild, they would not be so white. They would be a little bit more brown. When they get a little bit older, they're cremini mushrooms, which is a little bit earthier, a little bit more mature, a little bit more flavorful. They are a little bit more expensive in the store as well. Yeah, these are looking good. Take a look. Yeah. I try to let them sit and get like a nice little crust on them and then just give them one stir, but I don't want them to burn, so I'm keeping an eye on it. And maybe having another swig of the Pinot Noir. But then the oldest stage of this mushroom is the portobello. which makes sense because it's so big. But it was really something I did not realize it. Did not realize they were all the same mushroom. All right, these look really good, so I'm gonna show them to you real quick. And I'm gonna add these to the same bowl with the other mushrooms. Alrighty, let me turn this down for a second. All right, so these sauteed mushrooms are just going to sit aside while we prepare the next steps. So I've turned down the pan just so it's not like scalding, but let me get our next ingredient, which is 4 tablespoons of butter. And I'm going to dump that into the pan, and we're going to let that melt. And I'm going to turn this up to, since I had turned it down, I'm going to turn it back up to like medium. The pan's pretty darn hot. So we're going to let this butter melt in here, but I don't want it to burn, so I'm keeping my eye on it. Get rid of this. Okay, on to the next stage. You can see why I did so much prep work before. Okay, so you can see the butter's melting. One of these days, maybe I'll invest in one of those camera holders that, you know, can show you the overhead, so I don't have to like pick up my tripod. Okay, so their butter is melted, and what I have is 1 large onion that I've already chopped up, and I'm going to throw this into the melted butter. Give it a swirl so that it gets coated. And we're going to let this saute till they get soft. Which will be a few minutes. They talk about the other ingredients that we're going to be adding to this after the onions get soft. So I have, in this little ramekin here, I have 4 garlic cloves that are chopped. I have already chopped up here on a plate. This is about a half a pound or a quarter pound of lacinato kale, which, if you're not familiar with lacinato kale, it is, another name for it is Italian kale. It's a little bit like of a longer leaf, and it's more wrinkly looking. It's a deeper green than your typical kale. And I like using it when I can find it because it's a little bit more mild. You know, kale has kind of a strong flavor. I like kale, and if you can't find the lacinato kale, the regular kale will work just fine. This is one of the things that I like to prepare in advance because you have to cut out that big stem that's in the middle, because that's like really hard and chewy and it's not pleasurable to eat. So I cut the leaves away from that stem, and then I just chop them up, you know, loosely, like into ribbons. The other thing that I have in here on this plate is a tablespoon of fresh thyme, and I strongly recommend that you use fresh herbs when you can find it. If you don't have it at home, if you don't have fresh herbs at home, don't sweat it. I mean, use the dried, but I do think it makes a big difference when you're able to use the fresh herbs. And we're going into the growing season. If you have a little kitchen garden, I would definitely recommend doing some herbs so that you don't, because herbs are expensive at the store. So in any case, so I've got a tablespoon of thyme and I have 2 teaspoons of chopped fresh rosemary all going in. So it looks like our onions are nice and brown and sauteed. They smell really good. So I'm going to go ahead and add these, and they're just getting dumped in. So here goes the garlic. I'm going to grab the herbs off the plate and sprinkle them around, and then I'm just going to dump in all of our kale. All right, so we are going to give this a stir. And the other thing you'll notice, like, usually when you put greens into a pan like this, like say spinach, they wilt pretty quickly and get, really condensed down. The kale, this kale actually holds itself together a little bit. Obviously it does, the liquids get cooked out of it and it does kind of wilt in the pan, but it doesn't quite get as like small as like spinach. And I find the lacinato kale holds itself together more so than regular kale. Okay, now the instructions say to salt and pepper this again, but I feel like we've salt and peppered the heck out of this thing. So since we're a little sensitive to salt in our house, I am not going to put more salt on here. Yeah, so we're just going to let that kind of just cook a little bit. Have a little sip of wine. That's really good. All right. So I will say that this dish does come together. Once you've done all the prep work, it really does come together pretty quickly because you're just sauteing things in stages and then it all comes together pretty quick. All right, so let me show you what it looks like. And that's pretty well cooked down. Work my tripod here. Whoops. I'm getting all discombobulated. So now what I want to do is I have about 1/4 cup of flour, just all-purpose flour in this ramekin. Now that this is cooked down, I'm going to sprinkle this on top. And I'm going to stir it around and let the flour get a little bit toasted. You'll notice, and I'm going to show you this, you'll notice that it will start coating the bottom of the skillet. And that's okay, because we really want that. We don't want that raw flour taste. We want a cooked flour. We want something that has been a little bit toasted. Now I'm going to need 2 hands to do this next part, so I'm going to have to put the camera down. Oops. There we go. So I have here 1.5 cups of chicken stock. I use the no salt added variety. And then I also have 3/4 cup of heavy cream. I know, but it's only 3/4 cup, and this is, a pretty big pot pie. So, but this is how we're going to make our base. So now that we have our flour is toasty brown, we're going to carefully pour in our liquids. And I start with the chicken stock, and I pour in a little bit and I stir it around and I make sure I get the bits off the bottom. And you want to add it, just don't dump it all in, because for one thing, you're going to make clumps, or you could like splash up, you know, hot stuff could splash up on you, and that's never pleasant. There. Let me show you what it looks like after I've put the and the flour acts as a thickener, but it's also adding flavor because we've let it toast. All right, so that's pretty well incorporated. So now I'm going to take my heavy cream. And I'm also going to add this kind of slowly too, because if you add dairy to a hot pan, it can, if you add it too quickly, it can curdle and kind of break up, and you don't want that, because that's not pleasant either. There. And here, this is what it looks like. All right, we're going to let that cook a little bit and just do its thing. And while it's doing that, I'm going to move some of these dishes out of the way. I'm going to let that cook probably about 5-ish minutes. And now we can start gathering the rest of what is going to go into this pot pie. So we have all the mushrooms that we sauteed earlier. They're in this jar. We've got our, oh, you know what I forgot? I was supposed to put in, I can still do it, 3/4 of a cup of the liquid from the porcini mushrooms, or 1/4 of a cup, excuse me. So one of the things I like about these porcini mushrooms is that they're dried, and when you reconstitute them, they just are so earthy and yummy, and they just add a really nice flavor. And just adding some of that liquid to this base for the pot pie is just really going to take it up a notch. Going to make it super mushroomy. So if you like mushrooms, this is the dish for you. I've never had so many people, like I teased this a couple of weeks ago when I was testing it, when I was testing out the recipe, and you wouldn't believe how many messages I got about people like looking for the recipe and afraid that they missed it and all of that. And I was like, no, you haven't missed it. You haven't missed a thing. I was originally going to do it next week because I had something else planned for this week, but it worked out. What I am going to do is take, now I've got the porcinis, I'm going to strain out the porcinis. Oh shoot, I made kind of a mess. I got porcini juice all over the place. I mean, actually, if you want to get an idea, look, that is what the boiling water looked like after the porcini soaked in it for a while. You can see how rich that sauce is. I'm going to clean up my little bit of my mess here. So now that I've got these porcini strained, I'm just going to dump them in with the rest of the mushrooms so that I can get rid of some more of these plates. I will say I wish I had some like a sous chef or something that came and like did all the cleaning after I cooked. That's the one thing that's kind of a drag about cooking, right? Is the cleanup. Okay. So the mushrooms are ready. And then I have one other plate of prepared rest of the vegetables that are going in here. So what I have are 2 parsnips that I've chopped up into a little 1/2-inch dice, Parsnips are easy to chop up. It's a very humble vegetable, but it's very delicious. If you have not ever tried a parsnip, I strongly encourage you to do so. Do not be afraid of the parsnip. But if you like turnips, use a turnip. If you like a rutabaga, use a rutabaga. Hey, go crazy. Use some celery root. I also have like 2 carrots that I've also chopped up into 1/2-inch dice. Both the parsnip and the carrots were peeled and diced. And then I have 2 small red potatoes, and I did not peel them, but I cut them up into a nice dice. So this is what our base looks like now. It's bubbly and thick, and I think it's exactly the way we want it. So I'm going to turn the heat off, and I'm going to give it a stir. I wish you guys could smell this because it really smells good. All right, so I gave it a little stir. It's not a bad idea to taste it at this point and test it for seasoning, but I already know what it tastes like, so I'm good. I'll just have a sip of wine instead. Yeah, good stuff. All right, so now that the heat is off, I'm going to go ahead and add all of my sauteed mushrooms. Give that a whirl just to get them incorporated. Remember, we've got 4 different kinds of mushrooms in here. We've got the dried porcinis, which we've reconstituted. We've got oyster mushrooms, we've got shiitake mushrooms, and we've got cremini mushrooms. And then we're going to take our vegetables, which are raw, and we're just going to put them in here. And I also want to give this a stir to get them all mixed in. All right. Take a look at that. Looks good. So now all we have to do is do the crust on top, which is not too bad at all. Let me just pull this stuff out of the way. And I'm gonna get my finisher stuff over here. All right, so I have a very large cutting board that I'm going to use for the crust, and I'm going to take a little bit of all-purpose flour and throw it on the board. So as you can see, I'm just going to spread this out. I guess if I were a real diehard, I guess I could make a pie crust, but I don't have that kind of time in my life. So I have a Pillsbury crust refrigerated pie crust, and honestly, I think they're just, I mean, I don't know, don't tell Martha Stewart on me, but I think they taste just as good, and they take so much less time. And all I have to do is take it out of the refrigerator. It's not even like the puff pastry where I had to like defrost it. This just is already refrigerated. So I'm just gonna unroll this bad boy. And what you'll notice is that this round is not going to be quite round enough to cover my pan. So what I'm going to do is just roll it out. That's why I put the flour down. And I have my rolling pin. And I'm just going to roll it out to get to be a little bit bigger. so that it will cover my whole pan. And I don't want it to be so big that it's like hanging off the sides. So what we'll do is if it's a little bit too big, we'll tuck the edges in. But you know, Pillsbury has already done the hard work for me. They've made the crust and they've already kind of rolled it out into a circle. So all I have to do is smush it down a little bit and make it a little bit bigger. So here I have it on my rolling pin, and I am going to flip it down over my pot pie, as you can see. So you can see that it just about covers, and I'm just going to tuck these edges in. And put 3 little cuts in here, just like if I were making a pie, so that there's an escape for the steam to come out. And see, I put 4 little cuts in there, just like a pie, hence the name, pot pie. And then our last step is an egg wash. So this is 1 egg and a little bit of water. And I'm just going to put this on top with my little pastry brush here. And by putting this egg wash on, you're going to get a beautiful color on the pastry crust when it's done, when it's baking. These pastry brushes really come in handy for stuff like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and be generous with it. There we go. All right, let's take a look. So this is ready to go into the oven. And we're going to bake this at 425 degrees in the middle rack for 30 minutes. And when it comes out, then we let it rest for 10 minutes. So I actually made one earlier so that you could see what it looks like when it's done. So let me get that out for you. Let me get my pans. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in the oven so I can bake it. And here is the finished product. Let me see, I can pull this down. So, and you can see that I actually made this one in a cast iron skillet, which I would highly recommend. I love cast iron skillets. This one is a new skillet for me, so I was still testing it out, but it's a 12-inch skillet. I love that you can cook on the stove with it. You can get a really nice crust. It's perfect. It's a beautiful pan for making steak because you get a beautiful crust on it. And it's not that hard to take care of. You just wash it with soap and water, dry it off, and then you just put a little bit of oil in it to season it. And it will last for forever. So I hope you enjoyed the mushroom pot pie. I know I really enjoyed it when I made it before. This pot pie is actually going to go to my good friend Virginia. I wanted to give her a little thank you for helping me out at the Equine Expo last week. I strongly encourage you to try it. When this video is downloaded into the YouTube channel, it'll have the full recipe with all the ingredients and all the steps. Definitely worth the effort. It's definitely worth the few bits of pots and pans that I have to clean up afterwards, and I love that it's all in one pan when I'm done. And if you want to make it gluten-free, you just have to either leave the crust off or use a gluten-free crust. So hope you guys enjoy it. Bye.